Hey everyone, for those who don't know me, my name is Leah Webb and I have a business, Deep Rooted Wellness. I've got a cookbook coming out in April that is available on Amazon and lots of different places for pre-order. It's the grain-free, sugar-free, dairy-free family cookbook. I'm super excited for when that is released. But some of the inspiration for that book came from my family and my kids' medical needs. And I have shared bits and pieces of this story over the years on my Facebook page and through Instagram, but I wanted to take an opportunity to share my son's entire story in one place so that this might help explain some things for people that have questions about allergies. And so when he was born, he's now 6.5. He was always really rashy, he had eczema. At one point he stopped gaining weight. And what we realized at that time is that he had a dairy allergy, which is actually fairly common in young babies. So I can't remember, but it's a pretty high percentage that actually have it's a transient allergy. So it's one that they outgrow. But this was his first diagnosed allergy when he was around 4 months old. It was the dairy that I was eating that he was getting in my breast milk. And when I stopped eating dairy, he started gaining weight again. And he had had diarrhea most of his life, and I just didn't know because I was a new mom. I'd never had a baby before. But his stools changed once I stopped eating dairy, and that's how we knew it was a problem for him. Got my notes up here, so if you see me looking off in La La Land, that's where I'm looking. So that was the first kind of food surprise with him, and then when I started introducing solids, I would feed him. I fed him like a bite of bread. I was always really cautious with introducing foods to him. I just knew he was a little different, and so I always did really small amounts of new foods, and so gave him a really tiny bite of bread. He ended up vomiting for about 5 or 6 hours afterwards. And I didn't know that that was an allergy. I didn't realize that an allergy could have a GI response. I thought it was just primarily a lung response with anaphylaxis. And so tried it again a few months later, same thing happened, ended up telling his pediatrician, and we got referred to an allergist. And it was confirmed that he had a wheat and barley allergy. And one thing that I always feel like is really important to distinguish here, because I know that people have a lot of different food issues, is that an allergy is an IgE mediated response. And so if you go to the allergist and you're explaining these different food issues that you have, and they're unable to diagnose you with an allergy, it's more likely that you have a sensitivity or an intolerance. Your immune response you can have varying immune responses. It can be IgA, IgG, your T cells can react, which is the case with things like celiac disease. So there are a lot of different ways your body can react to foods, but an allergist is only specializing in those IgE mediated responses. So when I talk about my son having allergies, I'm talking about they are diagnosed from the allergist, and he does carry an EpiPen for these. And so wheat was his first one, or I guess dairy was the first one. Wheat and barley were the next ones we found out about. And then it turned out he was also allergic to certain tree nuts. He would break out in hives. He had swelling. I've taken him to the emergency room before for rashes. He even had a reaction to almonds. It was like he could eat some nuts, but not all. And once I guess I gave him too many almonds, and he ended up with a full body rash, hives all over his trunk that lasted for about 3 or 4 days. I kept giving him Benadryl to try to manage it. And so in addition to these allergies, he also had some food sensitivity. So things like sesame, soy, cacao, melons, coconut. I mean, we had a really long list of foods that we had to avoid with him. So with the sensitivities, it wasn't that he had an anaphylactic reaction, but he did have rashes around his mouth and varying parts of his body. And I do still notice those from time to time if I feed him too much of something, but in general, his condition has really improved. And so some of the reason I believe his condition is improved is because of the diet that we chose to implement. And I saw a number of, we worked with a naturopath at one point, an acupuncturist, and then a chiropractor. We've seen different alternative care providers who have had varying suggestions that have helped to varying extents. And for my family, and everybody is different, so the experience that I'm sharing is really just our own experience. But my experience with him is that the treatment that was most effective in his care was really changing our diet and sticking to an anti-inflammatory diet for years. And so what that meant for us is we eliminated grains, dairy, and sugar. And when I say sugar, I'm not referring to naturally occurring sugars in things like starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes or fruit. We kept eating those things, but we did eliminate maple syrup, honey. We ate some dates, not a lot, but we got rid of sugar. I feel like sugar is probably the most inflammatory food that you can possibly have in your diet. And so we completely eliminated that. And then dairy is really on a case-by-case basis, but I do feel like that is an inflammatory food, and especially for people who have outward signs of inflammation. So in his case, he has asthma and allergies. You know that there is some type of gut response happening there, which means for him, it seemed to make sense to avoid dairy. And then grains we avoided because grains, if prepared correctly, it can help degrade a lot of the detrimental compounds that are in those foods. But proper preparation of grains really requires soaking, sprouting, fermenting, and that's a lot of work. And so what we ended up doing is just deciding to eliminate them altogether. And we stuck to this diet pretty much 100%, I mean, with very few exceptions, for about 2.5 years. And the improvements that I saw from him is that he did outgrow a number of his allergies, and these had been previously diagnosed. So he outgrew a number of allergies. His asthma is much, much better than it used to be. Whether he outgrew these allergies because of the changes that we made and because of seeing these functional doctors, whether it's from that or that it's just that he would have outgrown these things anyways, I will never know. But I do believe that the work that we did has helped to heal his gut to the extent that he has improved. If you look at research on immune responses, and that's what an allergy is, it's an out of control immune response. Same thing with asthma, these inflammatory conditions, it's an immune response. If you look at research of where your immune response is initiated, about 75% of that is actually initiated in your gut. Some estimates are as high as 85%. And so that's why I chose this approach, was that if you could heal the gut, you could heal the immune response. So the one allergy that continued to worsen was his allergy to wheat and likely barley as well. He really never is exposed to barley, and so we're actually not really sure where he lies with that. But he had a pretty major reaction probably 18 months ago where he had eaten a wrap that was manufactured on shared equipment, and I had to administer his EpiPen. He ended up in the emergency room with 2 more doses of epinephrine. He was on IV Benadryl, IV steroids, oxygen. Pretty much, I'd asked our allergist after the fact, and he said on a scale from a 1 to 5, he was pretty much as bad of a reaction as you can possibly get before a 5, which 5, the end point is death. And so Owen's wheat allergy is much, much worse than it used to be. And when he was going into kindergarten, he was going into a lunchroom, sitting with kids that were eating wheat all around him in quantities that he had never been exposed to. And that's when we decided to try something called oral immunotherapy, OIT. And this is a newer treatment. I mean, it's been around for longer periods of time in Europe, and most of the research around OIT has to do with peanuts. But what they do is they start by exposing the individual to micrograms of the allergen. It's basically the same principle as allergy shots, only you're consuming the food that you're allergic to. And so he started by having, it was a jar of wheat flour in water that we had to shake, pull some up with a syringe, and administer it to him once a day. And every 2 weeks, we'd go back to the allergist and they would up his dose in the office. We'd hang out there for about an hour or two, just so that they could monitor him. And then we'd go home with that dose and we would continue giving him that dose daily. And he did that for about 6 months. He's done now. And so I wanted to show you what it is that he eats every single day. And they do it with Wheat Chex, which is a General Mills brand of cereal. And we did the whole treatment using Wheat Chex, but then I requested that we switch to an organic brand just to avoid glyphosate and GMOs and all of the things that I do try to avoid with processed conventionally grown foods. And so what we switched to is this, it's a Kasha brand, and I can't remember, Healthy Harvest Wheat or something. So these are basically like a Wheat Chex. So he eats 2 of these every single day now, and this is considered his maintenance dose. And so we could go further, we could pick this treatment back up at some point and increase his dose if we ever wanted to, but for now, this is just our stopping point, and we're going to stay right there where we're at. He is going back to have his blood IgE levels measured in a few weeks or months. I can't remember when that appointment is, but his IgE levels have always been greater than 100, and so that is considered to be off the charts. That is as high as you can possibly get. And so most people are more familiar with these allergies as bad as his with things like peanuts and tree nuts, but it does happen with any of these allergens that he is extremely allergic. So the fact that he is eating this much wheat every single day, I mean, this is enough that would send him into anaphylaxis. And so this is really a great treatment option if you have an allergist nearby. And so now I just wanted to kind of tell you about the challenges that have come along with OIT, because it has been mostly smooth sailing. When he started this, he had a couple of issues with his asthma. I mean, really, really minor, and not even clear sometimes if he was even having trouble. And so I would say that as far as this, and it goes differently for everybody. Some people do have a more difficult time. We did not. This was very easy for us. So the challenges as far as dosing go, the timing is that you have to rest for 30 minutes before you take the dose, and you have to rest for 2 hours after taking the dose, or you can take it before bed, but you have to be awake for an hour before you go to bed. And it always has to be taken with food. So what we ended up choosing to do was that he was going to take it at night with dinner around 5:30 or 6, and then he goes to bed around 7 or 8. And so after we have dinner, that's always downtime, it's quiet time. You know, he's not running around anymore after dinner. And this has worked great for us up until recently. And now we've had a couple of challenges because he has soccer practice from 5:30 to 7, which is normally this period where he'd be having dinner, taking wheat, and then going to bed. And so there is a little bit of wiggle room in adjusting the timing of these doses. So you can, if in general we give it to him at 5:30, we can go 3 hours before that or 3 hours after that. And this is all what our allergist has told us. If your allergist tells you something different, then don't do what I am telling you to do. There are different protocols, but I'm just summarizing this for people who are curious to know what this process is like. So I can give it to him as early as 2:30, or I can give it to him as late as 8:30. And so he now has soccer practice 2 days a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5:30. So my strategy has been that when I pick him up from school at 3 o'clock, he immediately eats a snack and he takes his wheat. And then those next 2 hours have to be rest time. What happened this last week was that he actually had a very delayed allergic reaction. And this is the first time that he was in anaphylaxis. It was really mild and minor. Anytime you are in true anaphylaxis, it's when you have a multi-symptom reaction. So you'll have runny nose, or hives, difficulty breathing. He was having all three of those things were happening at once, and they were very mild, but if you have more than one symptom, then you're considered to be an anaphylaxis. And so this actually happened an hour into his soccer practice. And so we're not entirely clear if the reaction happened because of a delayed reaction from taking his wheat, or if it was actually caused by something else. So where they practice is right next to a beer brewery, and it smelled really strongly of wort that day. And because he is allergic to barley, we do kind of wonder if being around that smell for such a prolonged amount of time is what kind of caused this reaction. So I can't say for 100% certainty what it is that happened that day, but we're working on figuring something out with our allergist that feels like a safer approach for him. So I won't go into that, but so there are some challenges that do come along with OIT, and the biggest one is the timing. And then the second biggest one is that you do have to go to the allergist every other week for a long time. And my kids got tired of going, and I got tired of going, but I also felt like it was worth it to have the results that we got. So if you guys have any specific questions about my son and what we've done for his allergies or anything to that extent, I'd be happy to answer it, but I just kind of wanted to put all of his information in one spot so that you guys could know what it is that we did and how he's doing now. And and he goes to school every day eating in a lunchroom with all those kids, and I have much greater peace of mind knowing that he has gone through this treatment. It also makes it to where we can eat out again with him, so it really has offered a level of security that we did not have before. And for me, I strongly feel that those mild inconveniences of trying to time his dose and having to have gone to the allergist so much have been worth that peace of mind and that small level of protection that he has been offered. So, all right, that's it, everyone. Take care.